sports fans. You've tuned in to our COVID cast number 20. Tonight is apparently fight night because Dr. Udoshi has called out plenty of people on his Facebook page to come and join us tonight and get any myths, have any questions debunked. So here we are. In one corner, we have Dr. Sanjay Udoshi. Actually, he's at his house in Shavertown, Pennsylvania, which is like 10 miles that way. And then farther away, we have our co-hosts, Karen in Wisconsin and Terry in Texas. Hello, everyone.
Hey, John. Great to see you. So yes, thank you for the introduction and the music. That was very appropriate for what we're hoping to happen tonight, which is a open debate in the ring of ideas, so to speak, or the ring of evidence. I have my cut man with me, Terry Munt, as always, and I have my, I guess my strength trainer, Karen, with me from Wisconsin. Karen, great to see you. So I hope that we have a good evening. I hope everybody's doing well. And tonight we are going to go through some of the myths and the realities of COVID-19. As always, we welcome you to join us via the question and answer button down here in the Zoom or on FB Live. I want to make sure that everybody knows that these town halls aren't really the only resource that you can avail of. At fb.com/Sanjay Udoshi, we have a resource page for the general public. Consists of science news, education, and resources published by myself, curated by myself and others, and also not just our videos, but videos from other physicians and scientists that are highly educational, and they cover all kinds of topics related to the pandemic. For much more detailed level of science news, and that includes that from the research and biomedical community, we have a group page that you can ask for access to. You just go to our resource page and ask for an invite for the resource page. I'm sorry, the group page, which consists of all of the biomedical details and nitty gritty. So let's get into it, I guess. I will start with some information like we always do. Here we go. Slideshow. Okay, so what we hope to cover this evening is the myths and realities around testing. What are the diagnostic tests available? What are their types and values? Because I continue to get questions about what tests are available. Everything from the nasal swabs that we've been used to and accustomed to seeing as the primary way of getting diagnosed and evaluating whether you have the coronavirus, the value of these tests, and as well as a little bit more about antibody tests. Maybe we can discuss whether we can test our way out of the pandemic. There are proponents for a massive increase in testing, even though it has been repeatedly said by many that we are testing at the level necessary and that we are testing more than anywhere else in the world. Is the testing level adequate, and what kind of testing are we doing, and is that useful? So we'll go over that, and hopefully we'll hear from anyone that has a contrarian view. We'll talk about therapeutics, about what works based on the latest evidence, what we know doesn't work based on the latest evidence. And then we'll talk a bit about vaccinations, because there continues to be a lot of news coming out about vaccines and when they might be available, who are the current front-runner candidates, what is safe, what is the definition of effective, and what kinds of choices will we be faced with in the near term and in the longer term, and some details that a discussion between Dr. Sunil Nuthi and Dr. Natasha Zarish on our group page, which is, like I said, tuned for biomedical professionals, that was very elucidating about both testing, antibody testing, different forms of T-cell involvement testing, as well as whether or not you can get a vaccine later that is different from the vaccine you may initially get or choose to get, and what are the cautions around that. And then we'll talk about primary prevention and the strong objections that we continue to see from a very, very small and vocal minority that is anti-mask. We have those that are anti-vaccine, that are sharing conspiracy theories about all manner of craziness. And then why does this anti-science sentiment, why has it become so pervasive, and what can we do about it? Because there's a business case to state that all of the sharing of this kind of disinformation and the undermining of true evidence-based public health recommendations will indeed or have been prolonging the pandemic. So that is where we are in terms of our topics this week. As usual, I stop at this point to ask Karen or Terry whether there's any questions on the topics or anything that the audience wants to talk about before we delve into this.
Actually,
Yeah. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I have a question. So I think JJ is in the audience, and I think he thinks he's on this week and not next week.
No,
so
no, he knows. He knows.
Oh, does he? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I was going to say, if he's here with a conspiracy theory, he's too smart for me. I give up. I'm done. He's right, whatever it is.
So
I don't care.
that's a very, very wonderful thing to have Dr. Racines with us. He is here. He noted that he's going to try to jump in and out of this. He may be previously engaged, but he's going to try to keep an eye on this conversation and make that part of his presentation next week, where he will be talking about what we just said is the pervasiveness of disinformation and what we can do to get people to trust public health and evidence-based recommendations more, because as I said, there is a business case that states that we are prolonging, we're allowing this kind of information to prolong the pandemic. But it is great to see Dr. Racines with us. Thank you for joining us. And we will see him as the featured guest next week as we discuss these topics further from a more scientific perspective when it comes to the psychiatry and psychology associated with this. Okay, so here we go. Any other questions? Terry, you wanted to say something?
Oh, not about this. Someone said hello to people in Facebook, and they didn't have a statement. They just wanted to remind everyone that the election day is November 3rd.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good. Okay, so let's go back to that and we'll dig right in. Okay, so as we always do, we're going to go quickly over the national scene and more specifically here in Pennsylvania. Up in the left-hand corner, you see a map that I just became aware of, which is a map of reported symptoms that is associated with COVID. So obviously, the South is being hit pretty hard. This is really not a scientific survey, but it is an indication of the probability of test positive increases in the very near future. So we're seeing that people are feeling sick in Idaho and North Dakota, so we can probably take a look in the upcoming days to see whether they're case positivity begins to spike. But this has been an early indicator of increases in case positivity. And this is a pretty interesting map. The links for all of this, including the entire PowerPoint that you're going to observe tonight, will be available on our resource page in its entirety as a PowerPoint. And so you can do with it as you wish, because this is all publicly available data and I claim no authorship or rights to it. So we see that the United States continues to lead in the number of cases. The total number of cases now approaching 5 million. The count as of yesterday was almost 50,000. And as I said, that number belies the fact that for every positive case that you see reported as a result of testing, you can assume that 9 other cases have not come forward to be tested in time. So every day that you see, 50 or 60,000 new cases, epidemiologists and others who are tracking this will go ahead and assume in their models that about 400,000 new cases are out there. So that's bad news. Brazil is close behind us, followed by Mexico. India's cases are surging. I have reports from my own family members that serve in the biomedical community in India that things are getting ugly. So we need to watch that carefully because there are 1.3 billion people there. And so the deaths obviously follow. We had a surge that you see down here in the left that is now both leveled and begun to decline. And since this is the early part of the week, that decline, I hope, continues to be precipitous as it is compared to the previous peak and decline. I hope this comes down much more quickly because we have a number of things going on in the next couple of months, which we began to talk about over the last few weeks, which is the reopening of schools and the beginning of flu season. That if these case numbers continue to be extremely high, all of our hopes and aspirations for a return to school and some semblance of normalcy, both socioeconomically and in the healthcare field, will be drowned in this wave. So what you will see that was particularly interesting to me in the national picture is that here in Luzerne County, we have an SVI score of about 0.5, and that is the vulnerability score. So vulnerability is what percentage of your population is above the age of 65 or has the comorbidities associated with poor prognosis with COVID, which is hypertension, diabetes, obesity. And you will see that throughout the South, they have very, very high vulnerability scores. So we covered about 5 weeks ago that the D614 variant or the mutation that has now shown very high transmissibility in the South is not as virulent in terms of the course of disease and the detrimental effects of a moderate to severe case of COVID than what New York suffered. However, with the high vulnerability of the citizens of the South and the high prevalence of the diseases that lead to very poor course of COVID, it is dangerous for them to continue to sustain very, very high levels of transmission. So this is what it looks like nationally. Here in Pennsylvania, we have largely gone green. And in terms of the percentage positivity, we continue to see certain locations have for example, out west, we see a high percentage positivity. But for us here in the Northeast, we're enjoying a pretty low percentage positivity here in Lackawanna and Luzerne County, continuing to be below 5%, which bodes well for the reopening of our schools. I'd love for that to be below 2%, but it is where we are right now. The other part of the dashboard that is useful for all of us to be observing is here, Luzerne County is selected, and I took a screenshot of newly reported cases, the incidence rate per 100,000 residents, PCR positivity testing has been 2.2% over the previous 7 days of measurement, but 4.3% most recently. We had 16 new cases somewhere midweek, and that brought that number up. But I want to pause here because I want to take a moment because I have been observing states, at least 20 states, okay? And that includes California, New York, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Utah, Washington, so I can go on and on, but 20 states have been under my eye. And of the 20 states that I've been observing, the most detailed available to the public metrics indicating the progress of the pandemic have been a handful of states, and I'm very proud to say Pennsylvania is among them. So again, I tip my hat to our State Department of Health for providing these metrics, which again, I know the general public may not fully understand what these things mean, but for those of us in public health and in population health and et cetera, the extent to which they have provided this data for us to be able to make make ourselves better aware of what's going on is extraordinary. It's outstanding. Tip my hat to Dr. Levine and her crew. So that's where we are. John, any observations or comments here?
Nope.
Okay.
I agree.
Sanjay,
Yeah.
I do have two questions. One's a data question, but one is a symptoms question from someone who's not feeling good right now.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask that so that person can go rest if they need to go rest.
Absolutely.
But so David and his partner were tested, but a few days later he had quite noticeable mild symptoms: headache, fatigue, cough, sore throat, neuropathy in his toes.
Yep.
Is it possible before he was tested, before the virus was activated? We've both been quarantining apart. So he must have tested negative, but he's getting symptoms. So now he's more suspicious, I think.
Sure, of course, because exposure, the time to the virus being detectable is anywhere between 4 and 7 days, and it can be as long as 10 days before the test will show up positive. So what does that mean? Day 0, you're exposed. 4 days can go by with no appreciable virus in the naso and oropharynx that would show up on a test, and in some people as long as 7 to 10 days. So during that time, if they get tested and they're pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic, a test can come back negative. Then, within a very short period of time, 24 to 48 hours after the viral load reaches a certain level, then the symptoms come forward and they start to feel sick. So if he has an opportunity to get tested again, I would strongly advise that. And then, of course, the usual caveats, which I'll cover later, and he can pick them up from us after his nap. If you spike a fever over 101.5, which means closer to 102, if you have difficulty breathing, if severe malaise, any of those changes in your status that seem more severe, obviously please go to the emergency room or contact them ahead of time to let them know how you're feeling. If you don't have a primary care doctor to make the arrangements for you to be evaluated in a clinical setting like a hospital, okay? Because the earlier you do seek treatment, we have seen the better the results will be for you. And so I wish you the best. I hope it's mild, continues to be mild, and I hope you get over it quickly. And if you have any issues, feel free to contact us here, okay?
Yeah, we hope you feel better, David. So then Zena asked a question. What's the death rate in the US versus the world?
Okay, great question. Right now, we believe that so it varies greatly between different parts of the United States, but in general, the case fatality rate, which is I'll define it in a second. The case fatality rate, which is a metric that can be used to compare, across different continents and countries. Here in the U.S. is between 5 and 6%. In the worst hit places in Europe, which includes Spain and Italy, which were the first ones to bear the brunt of the pandemic, they were as high as 11% in Spain and 14% in Italy. That also is a result of their demographic profile. Italy has a much older population. In the UK, I believe it's around 8 or 9%, which was also and continues to be hard hit by the pandemic. So as far as our case fatality rate, it's between 5 and 6%. On the high side, 7, 9% in the South currently. And then in New York, it was as high, for a period of time as 14%. All in all, that doesn't mean much because there's a lot of error with the calculation of case fatality. But our mortality rate, which is for every patient positive with COVID that goes into the hospital, the percentage of people that die as a result of COVID right now is 0.8%. And that's down from 2.5% in the early part of the pandemic. So that means we have gotten better at treating patients in the last 5 months. And if you do seek treatment in a hospitalized setting, you are much better. You will do much better now than the people who were initially hospitalized during the pandemic 5 months ago. Okay. Keep going.
Yep, keep going.
Okay, here we go. All right, so so that covers those numbers, and here we go. This is for David. This is what's going on, in your body. Most likely, in a mild infection, the virus will enter. It will adhere to the epithelium of your respiratory tract, initially in the upper respiratory tract, and then it goes lower into the lungs. And this is where it gets a little dangerous for about 20% of the cases, more specifically about 6% of the cases that will require hospitalization. It will start to injure the epithelial cells all over the lungs, and then once it enters the bloodstream, it will enter a phase called viremia. Viremia is the detectable quantity of virus in your bloodstream, where then it goes and starts to damage the endothelium of your blood vessels. That will injure. David, don't get scared. This happens in those severe cases, okay? In the severe cases, it will injure the heart, the kidneys, and the liver. And what we know about the disease right now is your mild cases are associated with a small amount of inoculum, meaning you were just briefly exposed to someone who was carrying it, and it just came into your nose and mouth and infected your nasopharynx, oropharynx, and then you have a cough, you have a fever, you feel malaise, and within a few days you'll get over it. The more severe cases are associated with a high degree of inoculum, which means you were in a large crowd with a lot of people, a lot of interaction, a lot of, between two people that were sharing a space of a 3-foot radius. And, that happens in healthcare environments. That happens when you're seeing patients and you don't have adequate protection, or that, again, you're in a large crowded environment where people are not masked. So you will get a large amount of inoculum into your nose and mouth. That travels into your lungs. That large inoculum can then rapidly infect and rapidly overwhelm your normal defenses of your immune system, and that leads to this terrible severe infection. Okay, We also know that this virus, SARS-CoV-2, has its way of damaging all kinds of things. And the more susceptible people are the ones with hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, because those people have very fragile, what we call microvessels, or they have a existing microangiopathy, fragile little blood vessels that are caused by, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, and associated with obesity. And this tends to trigger a much faster inflammatory process, which then leads to fulminant pneumonia, damage to the heart, damage to the lungs and kidneys, and then it can really damage the heart. Okay, so anyone with hypertension and diabetes and obesity are at much higher risk for this side, the worst severe form of infection, because their blood vessels are so fragile. Okay. All right, so we went over this. Fever, dry cough, and fatigue are the most common symptoms. The rest of them are uncommon. If anyone has questions, you can stop me via Terry or Karen, but we've gone over this before. Now we're going to talk about asymptomatic carriers and testing, and why testing is important, and why more testing doesn't result in more cases. It just results in the elucidation of sick people. And when you have the elucidation of sick people, you then have the ability to treat them. And you have the ability to control the pandemic. And you have all kinds of other opportunities to bring this nightmare to a faster conclusion. Less testing does not mean less cases. It just means that you're missing a bunch of people who are sick and that need care. Anyone want to fight me on that? Okay.
I can play the devil's advocate here. Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
All right. Here's my best trump. So I know that we have more cases, we have less cases than we really do have, because I was tested several times before I went back to work, and I had at least 4 positive tests. So I registered as 4 positive tests before I got a negative test. So I know that we have more people testing positive than we really do, because they counted me 4 times.
Okay, cool. What percentage of people are having that issue?
Well, I know it happened to me, so it has 10%? To happen.
20, 30? Do you really want to work the numbers here? Because we have our ICUs overwhelmed. We have our healthcare system running at maximum at capacity in the hotspots. We have doctors and nurses saying that this will probably, they're retiring, okay? So you can fudge numbers all day long. You can play with them and make anything look the way you wish to make it look. But you cannot deny the amount of dead people, which is now over 150,000. You can't deny the fact that this has hit the United States the hardest. We have a absolutely out of control pandemic here in the United States as compared to anywhere else in the world, other than these other emerging hotspots like India, Brazil, and I don't feel that it is. I don't feel any pride whatsoever. In fact, I feel ashamed to consider my country among these extremely poor performing countries that have not addressed the pandemic and are allowing it to just ravage their populations. So when it comes to testing, there will be anecdotal nuances that lead to doubt about the realities of the numbers or the validity of the numbers. But trying to deny the fact that this has devastated our economy, that it has killed 150,000 people, which is the most people killed in any country anywhere, it's just invalid. It's just not a rational argument to make. So sure, I'm sure that one person will have tested either negative or positive multiple times. I'm sure there are tests that are in the aggregate that are of healthcare workers that are getting serially tested every week. and they're coming up negative. Okay, so for every overcount situation, there's an undercount situation. So they tend to in aggregate balance each other out. What doesn't balance out is any argument that the virus hasn't killed 150,000 people. It has. It's a serious problem. Okay. All right. So this goes to David's question about, why it could have been that he wasn't, his test didn't show up positive, and then he started to feel sick. As I said, between 4 and 7 days is usually what we call latency period or incubation period, which is the period of time in which the viral titer in the naso and oropharynx is still rising. It's still growing. It's still not causing the symptoms, but it's still not to the level where it's detectable. Okay, it will get to a point where it's detectable, and that's where the the nasopharyngeal swab becomes positive, and we'll cover the actual scientific details of the process in which the swab detection test is sensitive, and the different types of detection tests in increasing sensitivity. So after that, it becomes a moot point, right? After the symptoms are clear, those getting tested are just confirming the fact that they're sick with COVID instead of just sick. And these other curves represent some other, rather academic detection mechanisms, like, when does it become detectable in the stool? Well, here it is. It's detectable in the stool as far as when, 5-6 weeks after getting over the height of symptoms. Okay. What about the, can you isolate it from the respiratory tract versus the oral or nasopharynx? Yes, you can. Can you, when do the antibodies start getting detectable? Well, they're detectable within, the IgM is detectable, within 10 to 17 days, and then that starts to taper off, whereas then the IgG stays around, which is the protective neutralizing antibodies that are produced as a memory or memory of the exposure to COVID, and therefore those are the things that we test for to see what phase of post-infection you are in. Okay, so this is the two types of tests shown on one graph.
Hey, Sanjay?
Yeah.
Okay, first I want to tell you that Dr. Anna Alicia is on Facebook, said to say hello, and that they have mobile morgues now.
Yeah.
And her ICUs are a shit show. Gail Barron asked, isn't any testing set up with a plus-minus acceptable tolerance?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question.
I didn't either. Gail, if you could elaborate on that. We'll get back to it when she elaborates on it.
Okay, so maybe this will help. So it is somewhat of a binary question. The binary question being, have you been exposed, and therefore is there the presence of viral RNA, which is a signature of the virus, in your nose or not? That's what the swab test is a detection of. It doesn't tell you how much virus is in your nose. There's no way for that swab test to readily determine the amount of inoculum you were exposed to, and therefore the amount of inoculum or the amount of viral load is present in your nasopharynx and oropharynx. That swab test cannot tell you that. It can just tell you in your nose and the back of your mouth right now, is there any sign of the virus in the form of its RNA, which is this, the central portion of it that is a molecular fingerprint of the virus. So in your nose and mouth, there are viruses, lots of them, but none of them have the molecular fingerprint of SARS-CoV-2. they have their own molecular fingerprint. So when we do the swab, we pull it out, we process it, and we dissolve away everything that is not the viral RNA. Then we put it through a process called polymerase chain reaction, where a primer, which is this, that has been identified as absolutely specific to a part of the viral RNA, will bind only in the presence of that viral RNA. If it's not there, it doesn't bind. If it's not there, this process doesn't happen, where it is replicated many, many, many times. It's a process called amplification, okay? And then this is what's detected, okay? So what I'm saying is, if this is not found, nothing downstream will happen. Nothing downstream will happen. This is required for all of this to happen. And that is the detection test. So now if we do a detection test for other infectious diseases, the viral RNA or DNA or the bacterial RNA DNA that we will look for will be different from this one. Okay, so it's binary. You have it, you have it, which means you have been exposed, or you don't. All right. Now, can you possibly get a false negative? Yes, you can. In the beginning, the CDC tests were largely flawed. Largely meaning about 30% of them weren't returning the right results. They were returning false negatives because this primer here was wrong. So even though it was looking for something to bind to that was in the viral RNA, it wasn't built right. It wasn't, this was the whole, do we have enough reagents? Do we have enough materials? Are they in the right hands? Are we using the right reagents? This was in April 1st week, we talked about this. And it turns out that test that was the CDC created itself instead of using the WHO test was the flawed test. Okay. Can you get a false positive? Yes, you can. Okay. You can have very, 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 very minor exposure to largely dead virus. Okay. So if you are a caregiver in a nursing home and you just happen to be cleaning sheets or something like that, and you shake the thing out and it kind of lands in your nose, and you go get tested. Okay, there's no live virus in there. There's just viral fragments and a lot of, it's maybe 16, 18 days old, but it's still there. Okay, those viral fragments will hang out in your nose. You go get tested, and you can be false positive. You don't have the actual living viral agent that may cause the fulminant disease. So these tests are not, they're intent to be extremely sensitive. They're intent to be specific for COVID, for SARS-CoV-2. But mistakes happen. They're not perfect, okay? Which is what we discussed a couple of weeks ago when someone asked, well, if I test negative, can I go visit my friend in the nursing home? Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can, but you better go in there with a mask on in case that test was wrong. Okay? All right, so here, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Gail did follow up with, everybody is so caught up in counting cases, but as was pointed out, some people test multiple times. A plus-minus tolerance is what takes this into consideration when calculating totals. That's part of how the calculations are figured, right?
I still don't understand the question.
Oh, kind of like the way they do in polling. They have a margin of error.
Oh, a margin of error.
I bet that's what she's trying to say, plus minus, right?
Fine. Yeah. Okay. But I mean, I don't, we use all kinds of biostatistics normalization when we try to do the detailed epidemiology of spread. We have talked about all of the details of this, everything from R naught to R effective to starting with that as a baseline of transmission rate and predictions and models. And so true counts with a margin of error, great, go ye forth and do it, but it's not useful in any way. I don't really care what the margin of error is. If I assume that there is a 5 to 10% margin of error on every count, because from the different ways that the counties and states are collecting data and reporting data with no national standard, okay, we'll just take it as 5 to 10% margin of error. Because the difference between 76,000 cases in a day and 69,000 or 82,000 is irrelevant to me. It just means that there's a margin of error and we're in a shitstorm.
It's all bad. It's all bad. Hey, Sanjay, Zena wants to know if it's thumbs up or thumbs down on the antibody tests yet. Have they gotten better?
Yes, they've gotten better. Yes, they've gotten better, and they've
All right.
gotten more specific and more sensitive. But the original utility, and we'll go over this in a few slides, the original utility of antibody tests was to determine whether you had recovered and you have a measure of neutralizing antibodies, and whether that necessarily or might mean that you have an immunity from this wave of COVID. That was the case when we discussed it, and Terry knows very well because he went and got the antibody test after suspecting that he had been initially or early exposed, earlier than the testing was even available for swab testing and detection. So he went and got tested, and it showed that he didn't have antibodies. If he had shown positive for antibodies, his suspicion of having contracted COVID early on would have been confirmed. But what do you do with that? Well, epidemiologists thought, well, we'll just track that now and see if a bunch of people, start to get these antibody tests, then we'll be able to estimate seroprevalence. Seroprevalence is the amount of people in a population that are carrying antibodies to COVID. And that would contribute to their calculations of how fast it would take or how long it would take to get to a condition called herd immunity. Herd immunity being a segment of the population required to slow the spread significantly because they are providing a buffer as a result of being immune or largely immune to COVID infection. We figured out, what was it, a couple months ago, and we've had discussions on this at nearly every town hall, that herd immunity is a fallacy, and that natural development of herd immunity, it takes not just decades, it could take generations. So waiting around for this while people die and get sick and then continue to have sequelae is irrelevant. The seroprevalence is irrelevant. And the only thing that the antibody tests provide is confidence that you had this disease. It doesn't necessarily provide full confidence that you won't get it again. It does provide some confidence that you won't in this wave. But that's a whole different discussion.
It was the best money I ever threw away.
Yeah, it was my fault too.
I could have just put it in the shredder at work and got more of a return on it.
I was like, Terry, go get tested. Go.
Thanks, Sanjay. Hey, I do have one question on Facebook, and it's kind of interesting. Why are rapid tests not widely available in the U.S. for this coronavirus? Cost, materials, or government sucks? Actually, I put that last part on.
I'm going to have to choose all the above there. So I don't think I don't think cost is a problem. I think that it's a combination of the lack. So I called for the Defense Production Act to be used to scale up the production of now 3 rapid antigen testing kits. So the Abbott ID was the first one announced. That's been out there. That's the one used at the White House. There's the Cepheid Gene Expert Express, and now there is the Quidel Sophia 2 for COVID. And if we pumped, a couple $1 billion into those companies and told them, I want, 300 million produced in the next 3 months, it's not just a one and done. Those 300 million boxes can be used over and over and over and over and over again, because the little kits that come with it can be produced in the billions. All right. So we should have done that 4 months ago. So we would have had that today. If we had that today and every school had 10 of them, then you could do testing on every kid that needed testing. Okay. If every small business had access to a $268 box, they could, even if they were employing 150 people, which is the definition of small business, they could test all 150 people every week. Okay, so I think it is important for us to understand the value of testing. Testing is what will get us out of this pandemic, not a vaccine, and not therapeutics. Testing. That is my firm belief, that once you can test and isolate people with the disease, you can then get control of the pandemic. If everything is just unknown, then when you have 70,000 people come forward and get a positive test on this particular, the results come in on a particular day, you cannot track and trace 70,000 people. There isn't a country on earth that can do that. All right. So you need to bring the case positivity rate down, and then along with that, you have to test. Every opportunity to test and get a result quickly must be pursued. So there's that. Okay, now let me keep going here, because now it's getting interesting. Okay, so at the previous screen here, I showed you that this thing right now is taking about 2 to 16 days. If you go down my personal page, I'm getting personal reports from friends that sometimes it took 4 days, and sometimes it's just taken as long as 16 days to get their test results back right now. Unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. Useless after the second day. And when most of these test results are coming back between 2 and 16 days, this test is useless. And it is a waste of reagents, and it's a waste of effort from the labs processing them. It's just a waste. It's a national waste. Okay? Now, this is a different version of this, okay? And its acronym is LAMP. You don't need to know what it means. Perfect time for the dogs. 1 second. No.
And I'm here. Da-da, da-da. There's dogs barking.
Sorry,
No call for
okay.
John to dance.
So
this is RT-PCR is the previous one, reverse transcriptase. LAMP PCR is another form of it, and this is faster. So the labs that are set up to do this can do it in 2 hours, and they can process lots of them. Okay, so it's kind of a pre-built method to do this very specific test, and now labs are coming online that can do this quickly, and then you can process hundreds of samples a day, whereas I'm sorry, thousands of samples a day, whereas this is hundreds. Okay, so order of magnitude faster. I don't think anybody really wants me to explain this, so let's keep going. This is a brand new method which is utilizing a method called CRISPR. You've probably heard of it. It's called gene editing. It's a form of manipulating DNA or nucleic acids with a very specific protein. Cas is the acronym that you'll hear very often. Cas9 CRISPR, or CRISPR Cas9 is a way for gene editing to do all kinds of things. I could go into hours lecture about this, but this is a specific protein that does a specific thing You add the viral DNA, it goes through a process, and then you can detect it. So the Sherlock and detector assays are now being more readily available. This is a very small fraction of the number of tests that are being done. So the novel CRISPR method is probably less than 1% of tests. But the reason we should promote it and get labs at university centers and wherever there's large urban demand, so that our universities can be at the forefront of doing this. The novel CRISPR method, the reagents required, especially the proteins, these enzymes that are required, scale them up, get them out there, and get everybody in the urban centers to be able to be tested with a 1-hour turnaround time. Okay, and then so we're still on nasal swab. Just want to clarify, we started out in the early days with this. This method is still being used, but it's taking between 2 and 16 days to get back. This is the vast majority of tests that are being done in the United States, okay? This is a new method, which also can be used for pooling, and it is much faster. So this is coming online. This may represent maybe 2% of testing, okay? And then this is very, very rare, but it's there. People are using it, okay? Still nasal swab. Next is the ELISA. ELISAs are done in really, they're really, really sensitive. There's very, 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 if any, like false negatives. The reason is that it's set up to succeed. Okay, the sensitivity here is like 99.9%. We use this we used to use this to confirm whether a patient was HIV positive. Okay, this and Western blot technique. And so this will really tell you whether in the blood this will tell you from nasal swab, but then you can go to ELISA and then confirm whether there were antibodies and antigens, very, very specific to that virus. And you can test for this. So this is very, very highly sensitive. And I would say that this is really used in academic settings and not really very useful at all in a clinical setting. If you have COVID, you have COVID. We confirm it clinically and we confirm it with a swab test, and we're done. It's a rare, very rare cases where you need extremely high sensitivity, and in those cases, we're probably doing this to determine what strain you have. Okay, because it can get that down to the details of positivity. What strain does this patient have versus what strain does another patient have? You can use this method to compare it. Okay. And then finally, here's what I was talking about. So the oral test, which is you can just call it a spit test, is now being produced by 3 companies: Abbott, Quidel, and Cepheid. One of our friends on our page, in our resource page, Doug Wolf, is actually the designer of this system. Doug has been doing RT-PCR and designing rapid assay systems for decades. You'll hear him chiming in with his perfectly grammatically formed sentences and extremely scientific language. God love him. So what this does is it uses a lateral capillary flow mechanism. It's basically a p-test, but it's a spit test. You know what I'm talking about, right? So the antibodies are preloaded into the kit, and then you can spit on it, you throw it in a machine, and within 5 to 15 minutes, you have a highly sensitive result. Now, someone tell me why this isn't everywhere. In the richest country in the world, with the best healthcare system in the world, with the most testing in the world, according to some, why is this not everywhere? And raise your hands if you want this in your kid's school. Thank you.
I want this in every school.
Yep. All right. Anyone want to fight me?
Well, I got a question for you. Hold on. Let me assume my other identity.
I love this.
Hey, Sanjay, my cousin got COVID, but then he got in a car accident and a plane landed on him. Why
Yeah.
is he listed as a COVID death?
Yeah, because he got COVID, Terry. He got COVID, all right, and his cause of death um, may not be, related to the virus, but he's still going to be listed as a person who was positive for COVID and who died. And again, if you want to argue with me about the percentage or margin of error or percentage of cases that in this happening, because I heard this argument too about a rash of car accidents of COVID positive people, just a rash of them, like tens of thousands of COVID positive people are dying in car accidents, and they're just being listed as, or they're dying in car accidents, and come on, all right.
Or a plane landed on him.
You take one anecdote like that, and you try to extrapolate it. It stops at maybe the 1 or 2% mark of margin of error of that particular anecdote being so. What is the significance of that anecdote to the true number? Maybe a 1% margin of error.
No, it's 0.003.
Exactly. So
considering that they undercounted by thousands, it's a wash.
No. You see, this is the thing. This is another conspiracy theory, that Republicans are undercounting it and Democrats are overcounting it. Okay? So if you're a Democratic governor, you're overcounting it. For what reason, I have no idea. And if you're a Republican governor, you're undercounting it to show that you have better control.
Okay. I'm in Texas. That isn't like far-fetched.
Yeah. So if you are, according to all numbers, having case positivities above 20%, and that is a suppressed number, the real number is pretty scary, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
So I'm just going to say, so in Wisconsin right now, and this kind of feeds into Tracy Joseph's question about sending kids back to school. What are the factors into a decision? So I know in Wisconsin, we're trending up on the percentage of positive test cases, that average, and we're bouncing around 8 or 9%. So that's puts us in the yellow caution zone, and then once we get over 10%, that puts us in the red zone. So in Wisconsin, we're in the yellow zone, and a lot of teachers, understandably so, they want to go back to a normal life, even though going back to school the way it is now probably won't be a normal return anyway. But there are people that want to go back to school. If we had this rapid test situation, it would help so much, because I was listening to the virologist podcast that you had posted, and they talked a little bit about the difficulty in studying how children transmit, because kids, a lot of kids don't have symptoms, and the whole study is reliant on contact tracing.
Yes.
Can you explain, go into that just a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think the person who elucidated this the best was Beth Ann and Karen Patton last week, the teachers, when they said, I've got 1,800 kids in a building, okay, and they're going to be 600 on each floor. It takes 4 minutes for them to get from class to class in a day. I have no idea how many kids I come across, because if I'm hall monitoring and they're within 3 feet of me, then I have to count them as someone that I was in contact with. So if you're talking about contact tracing within a school setting that is going to resume in-person teaching at the same level as they did last September, it's absolutely confounding. Like I can't imagine doing a accurate contact tracing in that scenario. And that's one, I would say, small to medium-sized school. If you're going to do that for the 11 other schools that surround Scranton High School in a 25-mile radius, thousands of kids. And then what she also mentioned is not all of her kids come to school on school buses. In fact, no one does. They either walk or they're taking the public transportation. And we don't know how many people they come across on their way to school and on their way home. So contact tracing within the school is almost useless when you don't know what's happening to the child outside of the school and how many people they're in contact with in the duration of time between school hours. Did that help? I mean, I hope that picture helps, that contact tracing in a school of that many kids in a classroom size of 30 plus. And that is a small to medium scenario that I'm painting for you. Now, John talked about his high school, which is down the street from me, having, graduating classes just astoundingly large. Some graduating classes are 400, 500, some are 1,200. We're talking about juniors and seniors, sophomores and freshmen having class sizes between 400 and 1,000 kids per grade. How do you, I understand they're split up, but they're seeing the same teachers.
Sanjay, Jenny Shortell messaged me, and she said that at the high school her kids go to made a segment at TMZ because the kids are running up and down the hallway snatching masks off of kids' faces. She also sent me a picture of inside one of the classrooms, and half have masks on, half the kids have masks on, half the kids don't. I mean, there's literally a kid at a desk with his finger up his nose.
Jenny is the one we spoke to last week from
in Georgia. Yeah. So
all of this has already happened in the last 2 days?
Yeah. And already there's a letter home about a positive case, which we know what's going to happen. I mean, I'm not a psychic, but it's somewhat. Lisa Macy McCarty asked if there's a standard definition of in close contact.
That's a great question. So there's close contact in different scenarios. There's close contact in healthcare. Then there's close contact at home, so residential. And then I don't know the definition of close contact in a school setting. I would assume, and I'm going to use the same standard as a healthcare worker would use, okay? Because, and I don't think it really applies, because a healthcare worker will not come across the same number of human beings in a day that a teacher does. So if I use a nurse as an example, close contact is any person that you are in touch, you come in contact with during the course of providing care. Okay, so that means all of your healthcare teammates are close contacts, and every patient. All right. So in a school setting, that would mean every colleague that's a teacher or administrator or member of the academic or non-academic team that deals with children, and then all the children are close contacts. I mean, the same for physicians.
And going back to, if every school were to buy one of these spit test machines,
yeah,
you would need training to operate it, correct?
Yeah.
But what do you think the cost would be per school to have this 15-minute wonder test?
Well, the boxes are anywhere between, I checked already, the boxes are between $268 on a 10 count to an individual box of about $389. What I mean by that is if you buy 10, you get the bulk price of $268 per unit. If you just buy one, you pay $389. And then the reagents are probably around $15 a test or $18 a test.
That was from Jamie Lee Girl. So the process, what is the cost of the equipment to process these labs, or does the equipment currently in labs already have the ability to interpret the lab results?
Yeah, the labs have very sophisticated equipment. These three that I mentioned, Abbott ID, Gene Expert by Cepheid, and Sophia 2 by Quidel, are little boxes. They don't need a lot of expertise. They just need some basic training on handling the material to put the cartridge. It's either a cartridge or a little piece of plastic into the machine. The machine does all the work for you. The big labs actually that are doing all of the three that I in the slides that I showed you, so RT-PCR, LAMP, or CRISPR, they have big time sequencing equipment to do that work, and PCR, and high throughput. Okay, so they can do hundreds or thousands of tests a day. You don't want to do 100 tests on an Abbott ID box a day. I mean, you want to use it for suspicion, right? It can do it. I don't know the details. We'd have to get an Abbott salesman in here to pitch us, but but I'm sure it'll if you need to keep up with demand, you just buy another box. You know, you just keep expanding the capacity that way. But those boxes need to be out there, and I'm sure that airlines are going to start. You know, I know the big international airlines that have the long haul flights, they're already doing this. Okay, that's going to give much increased safety on their flights, right? Everybody's getting tested before they get on a 11-hour flight to wherever.
So Sanjay, going back to kids quick. So Laura linked to an article, and basically the summation of the article is that kids are very efficient at spreading the virus.
Yes, they are.
More than adults. Are you familiar with, there's a study that was done in a hospital in Chicago, and are you familiar with those studies?
I've read a number of articles. One, the Sentinel article is from South Korea, and it showed that kids under the age of 10 are susceptible but don't spread as much as kids over the age of 10. It does not mean that they don't spread at all. In fact, they do spread, but the kids above the age of 10 spread as efficiently, or perhaps, we'll get to that in a minute, they spread as efficiently as adults. And in children aged infant to 2 years old, their detectable viral load is sometimes between 10 and 100 times that of adults. So I want to make clear that a sniffly, sneezy 2-year-old that's COVID positive is a much more efficient spreader than an adult that is just sniffly, sneezy, okay? Because you can't put a mask over a 2-year-old or a less than 2-year-old.
Just by the nature of being a child, not necessarily,
yes.
Not necessarily that they have that much more virus.
No. In fact, we don't have strong evidence of that. We just know that and it just makes sense. I'm sure. I'm so glad and happy that our resource page has attracted so many bright minds and a lot of doctors as well, and nurses and biomedical researchers, and they've been telling me their experiences. Unfortunately, some of them have also been telling me, you know, of misadventures and having gotten sick and gotten over it, or gotten sick and are still struggling to get over it. Dr. Marchbank is a pediatrician and recently joined our ranks and has been following our stuff and been commenting. And he said that, you know, he corroborated everything that was being said there, that this is a recipe for disaster, because kids are just not, their behavior patterns are such that they're super spreaders. Okay. And that's the deal there. And we don't have, of the however million tests we've done so far, maybe 55, 60 million tests, less than 10% of those tested are people under the age of 18. So we don't know the full extent of, you know, the characteristics of how they carry the virus, okay, compared to what we know about adults. We do know that they don't get as badly ill, which is great. You know, it's great news. But are they as efficient spreaders? Yeah. And the problem with sending them all back to school isn't just that we should be worried about all of them getting sick. In fact, thankfully, it's the risk of all of them getting sick and getting badly ill is much lower than if, you know, if they were adult age. The problem is they're coming out, and that's the nidus of infection. That's the nidus. We talked about this. You know, the nidus becomes the high school or the grade school. And from that nidus of infection, the whole community, every household is at risk. Okay.
So Sanjay, one of the pictures Jenny just sent me was the hallway between classes. And remember, I said this would be the worst case scenario in the hallways. And it's literally bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, as far as you can see, with not even half of them masked up.
Okay, we'll bring Jenny on when I get through to the last part, because I want to hear her. All right, but
okay.
Let me go through the rest of this here. Share. All right. So, okay, now here comes the interesting stuff. So we've done testing. I can't believe nobody showed up yet to challenge me and challenge the data on testing, challenge the data on treatments, challenge the data on vaccination, challenge the data on masks. So if you're out there and you hear me on Facebook, let's go. Okay, let's talk about this. I want to hear your doubts. I want to hear your anxieties. I want to hear your conspiracies. Let's talk this through.
The one I hear a lot of is, you know, you go and you've been tested, even you get negative, like Karen was saying earlier, but all these tests are somehow accumulated into one. In Texas, they were using the antibody tests as a possible, yes. And now they took those out to conveniently lower their numbers, at least for a couple days. There's no faith in those numbers from the other side, because they hear this and it sticks in their head that, you know, it's all a big hoax, because these numbers are rubber and we make them to be whatever we want them to be.
Okay, so children are dying, doctors are dying, nurses are dying, EMTs are dying, grandparents are dying, 34-year-old marathon runner died. People are dying. You cannot make up deaths. You cannot make up the tears of their families. You cannot make up the devastation to their friends and their communities. You cannot make up the loss of their contributions to our society. Those aren't hoaxes. And what we did when we lost 3,300 people odd in response to a terrorist attack is spend $6 to $8 trillion responding to it. Okay, and our response to losing 150,000 people and a devastation to our economy of $10 trillion has been pathetic.
Sanjay, I would think that
your numbers and your margin of errors and your doubts are moot. Go ahead.
It's kind of hard when Sanjay channels his rage at you, Terry, isn't it? Because when I was playing a trumper before, I was like, oh my gosh, she's mad at me. So,
we're used to each other in that, so I don't, it bounces off of me, you know.
But can't we go back and take a look at deaths last year during this time period? Sure. And you said that we can't hide deaths, so we could go back and see if there is a large increase compared to last year. I would think that there would be. So there's no hiding that, correct?
There isn't. And you know, there was initial, this is like the flu, it's got an R naught like the flu, it's got a mortality like the flu. It's nothing like the flu. And I'm about to show you on you know, some graphs how it's nothing like the flu. But the thing is that even in the worst years when the flu killed, about 62,000 people. I mean, there are good years and bad years when it comes to flu, right? On a good year, which is not a good year at all, but on a good year, the mortality numbers are probably around 32,000. And the vast majority of those killed by flu are elderly. So that's the only similarity. And on a bad year, it's 60,000 plus. But this kills the elderly, but it kills the young, meaning 30, 40, 50-year-olds. And I have to bring us back into focus here. They're gone, and they are not going to cost anything anymore. The people that going to cost all of us are the 10 to 12% that recover from this with scarred lungs, scarred hearts, scarred kidneys, scarred livers, neurodegenerative effects, autoimmune sequelae, you name it. Because 10 to 12% is the running number right now on people who are called long haulers. That 30 days, 60 days, 70 days, 90 days after the virus is gone from their body, they're struggling still to get better. So if you can't do the math in your head, here, I'll help you, okay? We've got 5 million confirmed cases very shortly, okay? On the low side, 500,000 people are long haulers on the low side. What is that going to cost the economy? And if you don't care about that, what's it going to cost you in higher healthcare premiums? To all the economists out there, euphemism for conservatives. What's it going to cost you in increased premiums? To let this pandemic keep going until we blow past 5 million, into 6 million, into 8, into 10. And then you've got 1 million long haulers to carry on your shoulders. And you can throw a margin of error on that number too. And it's useless because the cost is real. Real numbers, real productivity, loss, okay? Anyway, so let's keep going. Hi, Rocket. Okay, so here we go. It can take, this is a chart simplified, right? So I said it could take anywhere between 4 and 7 days. They've made that 5. So 5 days from the point of exposure, your PCR test comes back to you got enough virus for that PCR test to come back positive, all right? Start of symptoms could coincide with that, could, or it doesn't have to. It can be 7 to 10 days later after exposure. And there could be 40% of people that 14 days after exposure out into this territory, they don't feel sick. They're the asymptomatic carriers, okay? They're the ones in Wisconsin that are Karen's neighbors that are, walking around without a t-shirt on and 2 beers in the hand and enjoying life, spreading it to everybody. So there's that. So then both tests can be unreliable. I don't want to get into that, but the point is this. So the virus titer starts to decrease after a certain point in time. This chart is an average of averages. So it could start to decrease, 14 days. It can start to decrease at 10 days, whatever. But this is averaging things out. Then the antibody test comes back. This is assuming this person gets sick, feels sick, okay? And then the antibody tests become detectable between 10 and 17 days. This is the IgM version. So there is a rapid antibody test now, an at-home kit. I don't know why you want to get it, but all it tells you is what phase of post-infectivity you are. It means that if you're IgM positive, that means you're pretty relatively close to the point in time where you were infected. If you're IgG positive but not IgM positive, that means you're pretty far away from the point in which you were infected, and you're carrying antibodies that are neutralizing and protective, most likely, okay? And then if you're carrying both IgG and IgM, you're somewhere during the class switching phase, somewhere in between. Okay, we call it class switching. All right. Anyone want to debate the existence of antibodies or the immune system? Have at me. And me. Let's see. Okay, so this is what happens with a rapid serology test for antibodies. You load the sample, you load the buffer, it incubates for a little while. There happens to be a antibody antigen reaction, and that will then light up. Okay, that will light up a particular bar on that test kit, and then if IgM is present, which is the first group of antibodies that are produced in response, that first bar goes and lights up. And if both light up and it just IgG is, then this is just like a p-test. You've seen this if you've ever done a pregnancy test or whatever. Okay. All right. So we have seen this many, many times. We've done this, I think, more than 10 weeks running, about how therapeutics have now reduced the mortality of COVID from a high of 2.5%. So 2.5% of all people that were COVID positive in the initial phase of this in April, 2.5% of the people that got hospitalized died. Now it's less than 1%. It's around 0.8%. Okay, and that's the reason for that is because we figured out how to use anti-inflammatories, anticoagulants, and antivirals in conjunction with each other to prevent the coagulopathy that's associated with COVID, to prevent the the wild viral replication that leads to the cytokine storm, which is a deranged immune response to the presence of the virus. Okay, so we know how to tamp that down so the body doesn't attack itself. That is the result of the cytokine storm, which if I didn't explain to you, John would have climbed all over me. So I'm not going to use that word very
rabble.
And then obviously, so clotting is a problem, and the overactive immune system is a problem, and the viral replication causing all kinds of damage to the heart and other places is a problem. So we've learned to deal with it with this trimodal therapy. So what are we using? We are using not HCQ, quercetin, and zinc as prophylaxis or in asymptomatic cases, not Camostat, which is has come out in a paper as potentially effective because we don't. It's a receptor blocker, specifically the transmembrane protein receptor, serine protease receptor, TMPRSS2. It blocks that, which is necessary for the virus to enter the cell. And so we found that this thing called Camostat M is out there. And if you click on that link, it will take you to the paper. And that paper will explain that it works in a mouse model. But just because it works in a mouse model, we can't start asking everybody to pop it. I hope you understand why. Okay. Bromhexine is the active ingredient in Mucinex. It's also a TMPRSS2 inhibitor. We don't want people taking Mucinex as a prophylactic for COVID because it probably, it's untested and it probably doesn't work, even though in hospitalized patients, it is being used to clear mucus, because mucus collection in an airway that's inflamed from a viral attack is a problem. So it has a role, but it has a time and place for it. Famotidine is the active ingredient in Pepcid. It is also a TMPRSS blocker. And tests showed that in elderly hospitalized patient, it wasn't effective. But it may still be of some use. We don't know yet, but we're testing in hospitalized patients to gather evidence. So melatonin has a very, very mild anti-inflammatory effect. It has a mild sedative effect. It enhances the circadian rhythm. It is produced naturally by your body, and it can be used as a supplement to aid with sleep. But melatonin alone as an anti-inflammatory is not as effective as hundreds of other agents that are used as anti-inflammatories. So there's no point in taking any of this stuff to prevent COVID, or if you have just recently tested positive, to prevent getting the more severe form of the disease.
What about acupuncture? What about acupuncture?
I don't know anything about acupuncture, but I want to be serious about this.
I know.
I want to answer that question seriously. If acupuncture is prescribed to 300 patients, and there's a control group of 300 patients, and the people giving the acupuncture don't know why they're giving acupuncture. Do you understand where I'm going with this? I'm talking about a randomized, double-blinded, controlled trial of acupuncture.
Yes, because that was one of the questions on my test. I wanted to ask you about what's an observational study versus...
Sure, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Absolutely. So here's some of the papers that have come out. Famotidine is associated with improved clinical outcome in hospitalized COVID patients. This is true, but not in the elderly COVID patients. This is from Northwell. Okay, so there's always a caveat with this. You have to read past this title. You have to actually look at the data, all right? Randomized trial of hydroxychloroquine at post-exposure prophylaxis doesn't work. You got to read the number of patients that they studied, okay? You got to look at the details of the materials and methods. Was it a well-designed study? Was selection bias part of it? Like, reading these things is not like reading an article in Newsweek or Time, okay? When I read this, I ask at least 2 or 3 other of my colleagues to read it with me. So they give me their impression, I give them my impression. So there's multiple sets of eyes looking at this, and that we study it as a data set. Okay? When we study it as a data set and we look at it as, from a consensus perspective, we learn things from each other. All right? And so this stuff is scientific papers, and the way you approach and read a scientific paper is very, very different than anything else that you will have to read and understand. Okay? So right now, the most effective, and I have a paper to prove this, not just one, multiple, the most effective prophylaxis, okay, or prevention of transmission of COVID, even from asymptomatic positives, is the use of a face mask and physical distancing in public. She's okay. She's okay here. So that's it. Okay, this is the case number 1, prophylaxis or asymptomatic positive. Here we go. Here are the agents. Here are the papers that cover whether they're useful or they work or not. And right now I have a not in red next to all of these, which means you're free to go ahead and try. No one's going to stop you. But all of the evidence indicates that these are not useful and not effective at this stage, which is prophylaxis or asymptomatic positive. Next. So what if you have a mild case where we just talked to David, who says that I think he might be in the mild case stage, right? So the recommendation is, if you have a mild case and you're at home, home-based supportive therapy is indicated, which means Tylenol for fever. Make sure you're hydrated with, electrolyte-rich, hydration, and make sure that you have multivitamin so that in the event, and 20 to 30% of Americans are vitamin deficient in something. Okay, it's also because American diet is what it is. So when you get sick, or before you get sick, or if you're living in a pandemic like we are, and we have stressed this from the beginning, multivitamins are indicated, are useful to fully make sure that you're nourished. Okay, and that is the case if you start to feel ill and you're tested positive. It starts with a low-grade fever, cough, loss of taste and smell, and also, COVID toes, that peripheral neuropathy, all kinds of little weird things start to happen, and then you're sick. And if you test positive, then make sure you have Tylenol, adequate hydration, and a multivitamin daily to start off with as supportive care at home. Okay.
The vitamins won't prevent you from getting the virus, but they'll help build your immune system.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
Absolutely. Yep. Correct. Now, should you immediately call someone and get quercetin, zinc, hydroxychloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, and azithromycin? The answer is no. And we're going to go over exactly why. Okay. Should you rush out and buy ivermectin and doxycycline? No. And we're going to go over exactly why. Should you increase if you're already on them, or should you start taking nebulized steroids? No, that would be dangerous. Okay. And then in the elderly, there's even reports of the use of low-dose radiation. And in the elderly, that may be, in very, very specific cases, useful. But I mean, I don't even know why I put it on there, but I just put it on there because it's out there. But do not irradiate yourself. Okay? So there's that.
Man, how do you do that? Do you make popcorn and stand in front of the microwave? I don't understand.
Dude, the American people are extremely resourceful. I'm not going to give them any ideas. Okay?
I'm back because I heard the H word. We call it the H word here in northeastern Pennsylvania.
Yes, the H. Yes.
And it's not allowed. And I'm here to throw the hammer down.
Sorry, man. Hey, I didn't bring it to the table. They did. The frontline doctors of America brought it to the table here tonight. So,
are you ready for the fight?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, here, let me get my fight guy here.
Oh.
So that Dr. Fauci is fooling all of us, because in 2005 there was a study in the national, that place.
Yes.
And it said that chloroquine is good for SARS.
Yeah.
So what do you got to say about that, Mr. Big City Doctor?
Okay. Well, I've got some news for you. One, it was effective only in a petri dish. Okay, not in a human being. Two, SARS-CoV-1 is a different organism completely than SARS-CoV-2, other than the fact that they are still beta coronaviruses, and so they're part of the same family of viruses. They act differently. They have different mechanisms of infectivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's some even more detailed questions as to what that said, what the actual paper was able to prove, and also whether or not Dr. Fauci actually said the things that he said about it. Okay, so I will not put words in Dr. Fauci's mouth, nor will I question what he may have said. I will say that that study is irrelevant, and there is a lot of basic science research that never makes it to the level of clinical usage. Okay, so that qualifies as a basic science paper, all right, or what we call fundamental research. Now, fundamental research in the era of HIV found hundreds of powerful antiviral compounds against HIV in vitro. Okay, only 3 of them ever made it to clinical use. All right, So, and we're going to go over exactly the mechanisms of action of chloroquine. All right, we're getting there. So the MATH protocol is something that is started when a mild case becomes a moderate case. And the next slide is moderate cases. So MATH protocol is an anticoagulant, not an antithrombotic, anticoagulant called aspirin. It can be used, but it's more likely to be given in this method. So intravenous methylprednisone, high dose intravenous vitamin C, which is ascorbic acid, thiamine, and full dose low molecular weight heparin. So what do these things do? This was the protocol put together by Dr. Paul Merrick at Virginia Commonwealth University. He's world famous for his emergency medicine protocols, and he found that, and he's a huge proponent of vitamin C as an RBC stabilizer and a antioxidant, and for lots of other reasons. So he uses vitamin C and vitamin B everywhere, which is fine, totally fine. Water soluble, give it all you want, can't be toxic. Anyway, so what does this mean? This is the IV methylprednisone is a immunomodulator or immunosuppressor. The vitamins are supplements, and low molecular weight heparin is an anticoagulant. You can also give, you can see that at the bottom there, he's also giving zinc, vitamin D for those who are vitamin D deficient, famotidine, magnesium, melatonin. He likes that stuff. He can give it. It's not harmful. And it's given in a hospital setting at a dose that is monitored by a healthcare team. Okay. So Dr. Merrick, thank you for that. Thank you for putting together the first trimodal therapy protocol. And I'm hearing that from nurses that they are using this all over the country to good effect, okay? For mild to moderate cases. Now let's go to moderate cases. Oh, sorry. Is this in order? Yeah, all right, it is in order. So in mild cases, why doesn't HCQ work with zinc and azithromycin? Well, it's got a risk profile, and people ask me, well, I've been, I know people have been taking it for lupus and rheumatoid arthritis for 18 years, and it's done no harm, and I've had no side effects, and etc. Very true. It is given in low doses. It's taken twice a week in those conditions. In this case, look at the dosage that HCQ was recommended at to have the ionophoric and endosomal pH effect required to have any semblance of efficacy. It was given at 800 milligrams and then 600 milligrams over 6 to 8 hours and then daily for 4 days. This was the protocol, along with zinc and azithromycin. And in a few minutes, you will see just how powerful azithromycin is by itself. So what was the exact purpose of giving HCQ along with it? The purpose was to try and replicate the experiment done by Dr. Didier Raoult in France. That was it. Okay, and the NIH halted the trial because of the risk profile. In this trial, you can see that, there was a placebo-controlled arm here, and these patients up here were given the actual regimen. All right, 43% had side effects. They had persisting symptoms over the 14 days of, they were given treatment. They had 2 deaths, and 2% were hospitalized, 0.4% was the percentage of death. Exactly the same as placebo. Exactly the same as placebo. But Sanjay, that's just one trial. Okay, but it was a properly designed trial. Okay, and it's this, if you want to kill a few more people, these results can be replicated. It's a template that can be replicated. Okay, but we don't do it. We don't replicate a trial that kills people. It's unethical. All right, next. What about a mild case where, this is another trial here. Hydroxychloroquine with or without azithromycin in mild to moderate COVID, okay? What were the conclusions? Among patients hospitalized with mild to moderate COVID, the use of hydroxychloroquine alone or with azithromycin did not improve clinical status at 15 days compared with the standard of care. Randomized control trial. Here we go, another one. Cluster randomized trial of hydroxychloroquine as prevention of COVID transmission and disease. So this is prophylaxis, okay, in mild cases. Post-exposure therapy with hydroxychloroquine did not prevent SARS-CoV-2 disease and infection in healthy individuals exposed to a PCR positive case. Our findings do not support HCQ as post-exposure prophylaxis for COVID. Now, this gets boring after a while, okay? It does, it gets really boring. All right, so what about moderate cases? Here's the hospitalized patients at Henry Ford Clinic and the difference, okay? So the survival probability was improved from 0.08 to 0.90. Okay, and why is this unreliable data? Well, look at the multivariable regression model. Look at the number of comorbidities in these patients. This is an uncontrolled study, and it is a retrospective chart review. Sure, the N is big, 2,541 patients, but it doesn't have a control. It's not randomized. It's not blinded. So it's rife with selection bias and other biases.
The Ford study, which is the link I saw everyone sharing. That,
yes, this is it.
So that study is an observational study.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a retrospective observational. It's not even a prospective observational study. Prospective observational studies allow you to control things. Retrospective is, this is what happened. And we think it's because A, B, and C. Okay, and you can't, it's very difficult to prove your hypothesis there. All right.
And don't they even say at the end of their study that that a different kind of study is going to be needed?
Oh, yes, they did. They said an RCT is required. A randomized control trial is required.
Okay.
So they believed that in this multi-hospital assessment, when controlling for COVID risk factors, which really the control was awful, how can you control? You didn't control. You can't control on a retrospective study. And hydroxychloroquine alone and in combination with azithromycin was associated with reduction in mortality. That was their conclusion. And this paper,
I was trying to think of a analogy for this. So basically, this is kind of like taking the middle of a book and saying it's a conclusion, but it's not.
I'll give you a great example. So University of Texas at Galveston did a study, okay, of the factors that go into mortality in a hospital setting. They wanted to know what are the general factors associated with mortality. So they picked 155 metrics. Some were lab, some were logistics, some were radiology, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted to know if any one or some cluster of these metrics represents a high risk for mortality, all right? Oddly enough, they even included telecommunications, all right? So who called who when? The number one predictor for mortality on retrospective analysis was the call to the chaplain. So the nurse's station that called the chaplain closest to the patient was the predictor of patient mortality. All right. It's silly, but it just shows you how studies can be totally, you use the wrong metrics to study and your study becomes useless. It becomes nonsense, especially in retrospect. Okay. If you look back on something, and when you look back on something, which the Henry Ford study did, it gives you good indication of what you should study. Okay. So if HCQ was associated with lower mortality, then you go forward with RCTs like the other ones. And they did those. They didn't even go forward. They were being done in parallel. When the other RCTs show that there was no efficacy, the Henry Ford study is then invalidated.
Sanjay, I thought I saw the reason why they initially started looking at HCQ is that they noticed patients with lupus that were on no.
Wrong.
Well, I thought that they figured out that it could be because those patients were more careful.
Nope.
Doesn't
That's
this go
nothing
back
to do with it. In fact,
it
there are.
was wasn't it a study done in Italy when they were, someone did a study with 30 patients that they had. And this is what started the ball running.
Yeah.
He had these 30 patients. He said he did a study with these 30 patients by giving them all the H word.
Yeah, no, this was Didier. What you were describing is not Italy, it's France. Didier,
oh, it was France? I thought it was Italy.
Dr. Didier rolled 36 patients, and that's what got the ball running. But what she's referring to is these lupus patients that have been on it for years. They wanted to find out if they're susceptible to COVID, and they are. There have been plenty of patients with rheumatoid arthritis, and lupus that have contracted and gotten ill from COVID, even being on HCQ. So then the apologists say, well, they were on such a low dose of HCQ and it wasn't given with zinc and azithromycin, obviously they got sick. So there's always an excuse. Okay, there's always a defense for an invalid position. But there's also a way to explain that molecularly, it doesn't make any sense to hold those views. So for example here, all right, so moderate cases, this is what works, all right? What works right now is a trimodal therapy. What everybody is using as an antiviral is remdesivir. Remdesivir is a adenosine nucleoside analog, which means that it acts like one of the pieces that's necessary to replicate the RNA of the virus. So ATCG, adenosine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Those are the 4 nucleic acids required to make DNA, RNA uracil as well. Anyway, so the point is that it acts like one of the pieces necessary. It then gets taken up by the viral replication cycle, and then it stops it because it doesn't work like the normal adenosine, right? So it's a decoy. Low molecular weight heparin stops the clotting. Dexamethasone stops the cytokine storm. This works. This is saving lives. This is what has cut mortality from 2.5% to 0.8% in the last 5 months. The MATH protocol, MATH Plus, Dr. Merrick with this additional supportive stuff like high dose vitamin C, famotidine, enoxaparin, aspirin, vitamin B. That stuff is just great because in a hospitalized patient that is having very poor nutrition, is not eating well, when you're supplementing this is helping the patient's immune system get its requisite nutrients to fight off the virus. Okay, so awesome. It is not ignoring the holistic health of the patient. It is supplementing the holistic health to give them these vitamins and other things that are necessary to fight the disease. What other immunomodulators are being studied? And why should we pay attention to these studies and these efficacy profiles instead of beating our head against the HCQ brick wall? Because we know what they do molecularly. And I have cited all of the papers, okay? We know that leronlimab, which was trialed and highly successful, and more research is being done currently, is a CCR5 or RANTES disruptor. We know that tocilizumab is an interleukin-6 inhibitor. We know that lenzilizumab is a CSF suppressor, okay? This is a form of white blood cell, okay? We know that favipiravir is a purine nucleoside competitor. We know that this itolizumab, which just came out as not being effective as the original trial showed, is a CD6 or a T-cell suppressor. We know because we've actually done the studies and we know molecularly what they do, all right? And I'll show you here. This is intensive. As soon as the patient really has difficulty breathing and things are going bad for their, their pulse ox is low, we prone them, we sedate them, we give them high flow oxygen. If necessary, and only if necessary, we ventilate them. If things are going really bad, and there's a medical center in Texas that is doing the extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. So the lungs have failed. And so you still have to oxygenate the patient and try to get them to a point where their lungs can heal a little bit. So they bypass them, okay? They oxygenate them outside of the body, external lung. For patients with acute pulmonary hypertension, that means their lung arteries in their lungs are just the extremely high blood pressure in there. We give prostacyclin. And then, of course, the other things to keep the cytokine storm at bay. And the convalescent plasma has been working in very severe cases. And luckily, we have the most convalescent plasma in the world because we have the most cases in the world and most recovered patients in the world, okay? I'm not saying that that's a benefit. I'm just saying that that's the case right now, all right? So we've got lots of convalescent plasma and it works. There's some experimental natural killer cell infusion testing going on in very, very severe cases. And this other agent here, which is used in rheumatoid arthritis as an immune suppression. All right, so this is what works. And you can download this. You can go to each link. You can read it yourself, okay? So post-ICU. Let's say you're one of the 30% of people that leave the ICU and not the 70% that die there. This is what we do for you. We keep you on the low-dose steroid. We keep you on the antithrombotic and anticoagulant therapy. Make sure that you have adequate vitamin C and vitamin D for healing process. And we will even give you melatonin and is most useful as a very and a microvasculature repair anti-inflammatory agent in diabetes, hypertension, and obesity. But guess what? Not a lot of people with diabetes, hypertension, and obesity make it out of the ICU.
Did you just say if you go into the ICU, it's 70-30? Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah. The high end of mortality is 82% and the low end of mortality is 56%. So currently it's a 70-30.
Okay.
Yep. I'm pretty sure JJ could corroborate that based on his hospital statistics. I think he mentioned that last time he was with us. Anyway, so long haulers. Long haulers, like I said, people who have recovered but haven't recovered. People who are going to cost our healthcare system mightily. Patients who have not recovered to the pre-illness baseline. So we will keep them on prednisone, very low dose. We'll make sure that they have other anti-inflammatories like statins, aspirin, melatonin, vitamin C, vitamin D. If we continue to see breathlessness and difficulty in activity, we'll do a cardiopulmonary imaging study of their heart and chest. And many times it is showing, even in patients who were not hospitalized and who are recovering at home, it's showing damage to the lungs and damage to the heart for these long haulers. That's why they're still breathless 2 months after recovery. Their heart is not pumping efficiently, their lungs are scarred. And then for those that have other issues, we will continue to do and monitor their liver function and their renal function. So everything I covered here is what works, what we know. Hot off the presses is vasointestinal peptide. It has a brand name. It's called Viptidil. It has a experimental chemical name called RLF100. It's marketed by NeuroRx. That's the company name. Interferon beta, which we covered 2 weeks ago, a company out of UK that's been using it. 79% reduction in symptomatology in the patients that it was trialed in. And I'm talking severe symptomatology. So these two inhaled nebulized agents go directly to the site of injury and at various stages of disease, either moderate or severe, they work extremely well. So if you want to track all of these drugs and all the studies and all of the things that are going on that are promising, and far more, showing far more efficacious profile than our friends who are pushing HCQ, then you can go and read the real science. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah, I have one from Deborah Villa-Smith on Facebook. And then what about people who have HTN but take a daily BP med to control it? Still the same risk?
Less risk. Very good question. So if you have hypertension and it's treated and it's under control, then it has you have a similar risk profile to someone who has not had hypertension. Now, if you have long-standing hypertension and that is poorly controlled, then even if you're on that blood pressure medication and it's poorly controlled, you're not in good shape. Okay, you're at risk. The measure of your risk is whether your blood pressure is under control, not whether you're on a medication.
And then Erica did ask a question a little bit ago, asking about severe cases regarding the kidneys.
Okay, yeah, acute kidney injury is very common in severe cases. The kidney function drops significantly. In younger patients, that picks up rapidly during the recovery phase, but in elderly patients, that can be a killer. Okay. And there's really nothing to prevent that other than the anticoagulants and the immunomodulators. So once you get sick and you're placed on dexamethasone and enoxaparin, low molecular weight heparin, those are largely protective. They will protect the kidneys. Got it? Got it.
Do you know off the top of your head, what's the death rate like over 65? It's higher than 0.8%, isn't it?
Oh, actual mortality rate of, yeah. I would know. We'll have to look that up. It's very high.
I've been using that to convince my mom to be careful because
it's very high. Above 65, if we could look that up, what's the mortality of patients above 65? We should tell people it's high. Okay, so drug repurposing is nothing more than drugs that have already undergone FDA and they've got undergone regulatory approval. So they are approved by the FDA to do something. Okay, and you've heard me talk about all of these things now for the last hour: Camostat, Nifomostat, chloroquine, all the NIBs, all the MABs, all the VIRs. So remdesivir, favipiravir, hydroxychloroquine, interferon beta. This is all the places where they act within the cell replication cycle and in the cell. I'm sorry, the viral replication cycle and in the cell. This is a beautiful diagram that just summarizes, where each of these things work, where we have evidence that they work. What do they do? Okay, so interferon is a powerful antiviral. It is suppressed in COVID. The viral suppression of interferon, therefore replacing interferon using a nebulizer, like they do with SNG 001, will replace that powerful antiviral activity and reduce symptomatology. So see how this makes sense? Okay. This is the real mechanism of action of hydroxychloroquine: endosomal acidification. It happens to be a zinc ionophore, which means it helps zinc get in the cell. But that's not its mechanism of action. Okay? So when these guys come to my page and argue with me about the antiviral activity of zinc, I'm like, you're not wrong, but JJ has a wonderful saying about this. You're not even wrong. Not even wrong means you're not even in the same discussion. You're not even in the same debate as we are. Okay? You're not even wrong. All right? Because what we're talking about is its activity, all right, as an agent approved by the FDA and what it does to fight malaria. It happens to be a polyether ionophore. Wonderful. Great. You know nothing about that, by the way. So you don't even deserve to be in this conversation, but I'm going to humor you. I'm going to humor you. Anyway, so if you want to, I don't know why you would want to. This is what we do. This is what biomedical researchers and professionals do. We draw these diagrams, we validate these diagrams, we look for evidence that these diagrams are correct. Okay? But this is a beautiful diagram. If you ever come across a word that you hear on the news, like what's lopinavir, what's ritonavir, what's favipiravir? Oh, I heard that. Remdesivir, what does it do? This is what it does. Okay?
Hey, Sanjay.
Yeah.
The whole big city doctor remark goes back to a comment someone made on your page where they recited part of your resume as, you know, all this stuff you've done, and you're a corporate sellout. That was what he said. So
Yeah.
Mr. Big City Doctor.
Yeah.
It killed me. It just killed me when they did that.
I love that.
The generation before me grew up on the farm, so my grandma used to call them city slickers. So you're a city slicker.
Yeah, but I'm not. You got to see where I live. Yeah, John knows where I live. I wish I was. I'm not even
The
close.
cows outnumber the people.
I'm so happy I'm not a city slicker. I love my hometown. I love living here. But yeah, they can paint me to be whatever they want. That's fine. So there's that diagram. Now, stick with me, guys. Stick with me. I will get through this quickly. Drug repurposing. So we went over, so let's go with azithromycin first, because I want us to talk about this before we get to the hydroxychloroquine. Azithromycin is a macrolide. It is a category of antibiotic that was discovered. Initially, erythromycin was the first one. So you probably all heard of erythromycin. It's used in topical creams. It's used in ear infections, used in all kinds of infections. Roxithromycin was a short-lived drug that eventually became somewhat obsolete because of the rampant amount of drug resistance that was developed in the 80s and 90s. Then clarithromycin, and then we came forward with a fourth generation one called azithromycin, commonly known as your Z-Pack. Got a sore throat? Doc, need a Z-Pack. Okay? Got a sinus infection? Doc, Z-Pack. So this is everywhere. So what does it do? It does all of this stuff, right? It does, it has an anti-secretory effect, so it clears up the mucus. It has a so it basically tells the immune system, we've got an infection here, I need some help. IL-8 production, anti-inflammatory, it reduces bacterial adherence, it reduces virulence factors, it reduces the bacterial ability to perform the biofilms that are that protect the bacteria from your immune system. It does all this great stuff. It's a great antibiotic. So what's to say that azithromycin alone wouldn't do this without the help of zinc and hydroxychloroquine? Seems like since it's an upper respiratory drug with strong antibacterial effects, that it would not only do all of these things, but it would also reduce co-infection. If you reduce co-infection, that means the patient will likely do better, not worse. But there's a problem with giving it willy-nilly, and we'll get to that. Okay, so there's the science. Hey guys, for all you aficionados out there, tell me what this is. What's this? Where are my doubters at? Come on, tell me what this is. Hold on, sorry. Tell me what that is. All right, I'll make it easier on you. What is this, the green dot?
I didn't know there was going to be a test, Sanjay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Terry. The green dot is chlorine, okay? And the red one is oxygen. And this ring structure here is part of chloroquine. So the only difference between chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine is this right here, the oxygen and the hydrogen. When you add hydroxy to chloroquine, you get hydroxychloroquine. So we've long known that chloroquine does a couple of things inside of the cell that protects, well, that helps in the treatment of malaria. Now we found a better drug, artesunate, but this is the old school 50 to 60 years of the way we used to treat malaria. So it's involved in, right here, it lowers the pH in endosomes, these bubbles of liquid inside of the cell. And these bubbles are used for the plasmodia, which is a parasite that causes malaria, to replicate itself, okay? So there are 4 suspected mechanisms of action, suspected because we don't know for exactly sure, but we know that it does these things. And as a result of doing these things, okay, this is what it's able to stop from happening. So these drugs, chloroquine, doxycycline, which I'll get to, hydroxychloroquine, they interrupt the erythrocytic cycle of the replication of plasmodia species, which causes malaria. And so when you can interrupt this, you can slow down the severe fever, the RBC destruction, you know, the derangement even in malaria of the immune response. So this is what hydroxychloroquine actually does. And this is what we know it does. Okay, it's involved in the endoplasmic reticulum, it's involved in endosomes, it's involved in potentially some receptor blockade, MAP kinase phosphorylation. So we don't know which of these things leads to its true anti-malarial effect, but we know it does these things, right? Whereas all the other drugs that I've talked about, we know exactly what they do. They were engineered to do those things. Monoclonal antibodies, inhibitors, whatever, okay? And there's a very interesting story about where chloroquine comes from and how it was used to conquer Africa, okay? Because, you know, colonists needed this to protect themselves against malaria. Otherwise, the parts of Africa would never have been settled. And apparently this is not native to Africa. It was the Spanish who found it in Latin America, in South America. The quinine derivatives from the bark of the tree that produces this naturally. The Spanish brought it over as a bitter, and that bitter people realized that those who ingested the quote unquote tonic water did not develop malaria. All right. So ivermectin, this keeps coming up. Ivermectin is a anti-parasitic. It paralyzes parasites. And right now there's a doctor in Bangladesh that published a paper talking about if you combine this with doxycycline, then we're getting good effects in COVID. All right, cool. One paper. This will, if this turns out to be the new HCQ, we're done here. So, and then doxycycline. Doxycycline is just a second generation or third generation tetracycline. Tetracycline is a broad spectrum antibiotic. You combine this with ivermectin and they say they're getting good effects on COVID. And here's there's a paper on that somewhere. I don't know where. Anyway, why don't we just give drugs willy-nilly? Because MRSA, multi-drug resistant Staphylococcus aureus, is our fault. It never existed until we made it exist, okay? We called this antibiotic stewardship. And what that means is patient comes in, doc, I got a sore throat. I give him azithromycin, and the bacteria infecting his throat is resistant to, or not resistant to, is not susceptible to azithromycin at all, okay? But along with that is perhaps a co-infection of a bacteria that learns how to defeat the activity of azithromycin, all right? Then that gene gets passed on. So Staph aureus by itself was not multi-drug resistant. Staph aureus became multi-drug resistant in a hospital after constantly being attacked by inadequate or inappropriate antibiotics. It learned how to defeat those antibiotics by mutation. So antibiotic resistant superbugs kill more people than cancer by will kill more people than cancer by 2050. Approximately 55% of all money spent on antibiotics could have been attributed to outpatient environments. It's added 2.2 billion in medical costs. Anyway, so it's a mess. You don't prescribe drugs to patients where you don't know why you're prescribing it, period. But when you get a protocol, not a protocol, a guesswork experimental treatment that includes some anti-malarial, some anti-parasitic, some inert mineral, and then a powerful broad spectrum antibiotic, stop and think, why are you doing this? I mean, as a physician, if you don't stop and think, I'm giving a broad spectrum antibiotic to a patient for whom I don't know what its mechanism of action is, and I could be causing the development of the next superbug. It's just poor antibiotic stewardship, and it's stupid, and it's bad medicine. Okay. Anyway, before we go on to vaccines, I'm stopping here, and let's take questions. And I'm really upset. Nobody showed up. Nobody wanted to stand up to me. So they're all trolls. They're all Russian bots. Is that what's going on?
Look at the people I've gotten into it with. They won't stand up. They want to get their quick little blurb out.
Yep.
And then be on their way. They don't want to sit here and talk long term about their beliefs because that violates their little hit and run strategy.
Exactly. Is there anyone bad mouthing me on Facebook Live or anyone on the Zoom that wants to get into it? Come on.
I mean,
No, nothing.
I mean, your dog is snoring, and we can definitely hear that.
Yeah, sorry.
So,
yeah.
So it's possible that your dog is.
I can't do anything about it. It's Lily. She's like she's 8 years old. I can't move.
Yeah, in dog language, it's rabble, 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 rabble.
Yeah.
Puppies dreaming about hydrochloroquine.
I saw that in the chat from last week. I hear someone snoring, someone typed. And then I think Lauren was like, I think it's his dog. Okay, well, then we'll finish up. We'll go to vaccines. We're already over. I can't believe it. I mean, what am I doing here? Play from the start. All right, so antibiotic stewardship, don't give drugs to people who you don't know why you're giving it to them. The leaders right now in vaccine development are Moderna. mRNA is the way they're going forward. And then this is a modified adenovirus out in NHS Oxford in the UK. AstraZeneca is leading the charge. These are the types of vaccines that we went over. Live attenuated, viral vector, recombinant, DNA, mRNA. This is the simplest form of vaccination. This is the one being pursued to rapidly produce about 100 million doses by Moderna in the Operation Warp Speed.
Sanjay, we can't see your screen.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, these are all the vaccines under development. This is the one by Moderna. This is the one by AstraZeneca. This one is just mRNA, just the simple DNA-based, I'm sorry, the nucleic acid-based one. This is the more complex engineered virus. And then we have the different types are summarized here. So you can make a live attenuated vaccine like polio. You can make this one, viral vector, which is the AstraZeneca approach, recombinant or mRNA. mRNA is the simplest one. That's the one Operation Warp Speed is doing. This is the one that AstraZeneca is doing. They take the chimpanzee adenovirus, they modify it, they make it look like SARS-CoV-2, and then they inject it into the body. That gives the body the full antigenic picture. It looks like so basically it's a, what do they call it? A sheep in wolf's clothing. So here you go. And then this is the mask usage. Dr. Kim Prather from UC San Diego. I'm going to read you what she wrote. Airborne spread from undiagnosed infection will continue to undermine effectiveness of even the most vigorous testing, tracing, social distancing, etc. So we know this. This is her diagram. She studied this extensively. She's awesome, and we should listen to her. And so there's that.
There's lots of mask fights in Wisconsin. Our governor just did a statewide mandatory mask. So.
Oh, good. Excellent. Outstanding. And then, you know, things more uncomfortable than wearing a mask are gasping for air, coughing up blood, permanent lung damage, the huge medical bills for having to be hospitalized, burying someone you love, potentially harming or killing a stranger, and then yourself dying prematurely. So there's papers, tons of papers, tons of charts and graphs, but I don't think you need them. You should just grow up, be decent, and wear a mask. Okay. And yeah, so we've been through this. You know, you guys know this. I don't have to cover it. Protect the elderly, keep your distance, wash your hands, avoid you know, contact with people you don't know. If you're sick, please stay home. Don't go to work. Okay? Just don't go to work. I don't care. We'll figure something out. Yeah. And then recognizing the symptoms, and then yeah. So this is my most recent message on Facebook. Don't read it, just read my comment. So, and then obviously the my pet peeve now is calling something hydroxy. Hydroxy is this. This is hydroxy. Okay. So you don't call your country a, you know what, call it a country. So hydroxychloroquine is not hydroxy, it is hydroxychloroquine. Anyway, anyone else want to talk?
I was going to say Hydrox was the original Oreo cookie.
They were the knockoff Oreo, weren't they? Or were
no, they were the original.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oreo is actually the knockoff of the Hydrox cookie. Yeah.
Hey.
A little bit of esoteric knowledge I'm sharing with you.
So are we putting the H word ban back on after this one? Are we doing that?
Done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done.
I mean, we had to do it because they pumped out that bad video last week. So exactly. we were forced into it.
I mean, I hope this little deck made clear, you know, there's so much effort going on to find a way to save people's lives, to cut mortality down from 2.5 to 0.8 to whatever the lowest we can get it to. And I mean, this vasoactive intestinal peptide and interferon B as a nebulizer, I think that there's a lot of hope there, okay? I believe in the delivery method is going to be useful and simple, right? I believe that the molecular biology is there to support it. The ability to make it in huge quantities it's simple and straightforward, you know. And just and all the other stuff is just, it's just noise. It's dangerous noise.
I got a question from Deborah on the seriousness of the researchers, scientists, and doctors who are working to create a safe, effective vaccines. Do you think the vaccines that will actually be the most effective ones with proper trials that will actually work will not be a part of what this administration is pushing, or will it be a mixed bag?
Great question.
That's a great question.
It's a really great question. So, you know, I've had this discussion with very, very serious immunologists and scientists that they're surprised now that we call each of these types of vaccination modalities, we call them platforms, or they call them platforms. So taking a live virus and attenuating it means it does everything but cause a disease. Taking a virus and modifying it, recombination, all this. We have proven that these platforms work with different diseases. All of these previous ones work great, okay? Some are absolutely sterilizing in their immunization. Some are highly protective, like measles, polio, smallpox, all of these. These platforms have proven track records, millions of lives saved, etc. The Moderna mRNA approach is a new one. It is unproven. I have worked in a lab that tried to create the first DNA vaccine for HIV. And our efforts led to the development of a viable vaccine that was capable of going past, clinical trial phase 1, but we figured out early that it was only 30 to 40% effective at maximum. So we stopped research. We stopped asking for funding because what's the point in trying to develop a HIV vaccine that's only 30 to 40% effective? So there's some self-regulation that goes into it that the research community does, right? If a platform has never shown truly effective, this will be the first experiment in mass vaccination on this platform. I don't know. I can't put a lot of faith in it, And I'm not saying that this is. I'm not putting faith in it because of the Trump administration. I'm not putting faith in it because the science behind it is unproven. It's a new platform to deal with a new virus. And the platform is the simplest of all of the ones that I described, which makes it the easiest to bring to market. And because it's the easiest to bring to market, it's the fastest. So how much of Operation Warp Speed is about speed, and how much is it about effectiveness? And with the track record of this administration, I have to say it's all about the speed.
I think it's all about the stock price.
Sure. Why not? Yeah. I mean, this is America. Now do you know if you add all of the investments in vaccines, it's about $6 billion?
Yeah.
In 2 months. In 2 months. We've invested $6 billion in 2 months.
Our media, our press is so fixated on every little scrap that they can push out there. And all that does in turn is to play with stock prices. It doesn't represent reality of where the vaccine is at in its trials. It's all PR and cash.
Yeah.
AJ said, and how much of it is about being warped?
It's about being warped. I would say a lot of it has to do with being warped. Yeah. So here's a good question as an extension to the one that was just asked. If I were given the choice between the Moderna vaccine and the Oxford vaccine, the AstraZeneca, I would take the AstraZeneca. Proven platform,
I asked someone I worked with, I said, if they release a vaccine and it's only going to give 50% coverage to whoever takes it, I said, would you prefer that over something with an 80% effective? But you'd have to wait six more months to get the second vaccine. And he said, yeah, he'll take that 50-50 shot. I said, well, then that leaves 50% of the country uncovered, doesn't it? And he's like, fuck them.
Yeah. Yeah. My question there was to Dr. Nuthi was, if I take the Moderna vaccine now, okay, and it's proven not to be effective, can I take an improved version of it later, or can I take another platform altogether? And he said that it could cause cross-reactivity as severe as anaphylaxis, which means
Wow.
like, okay, or yeah, so that's the worst case scenario. Or you could, or the second vaccination could start, could cause you to create autoantibodies. So you have to choose. I guess you have to choose. I mean, this is very preliminary discussions between an immunology PhD and another researcher. Dr. Natasha Zarich, who keeps posting on our page. But she and he are having heated discussions about this over on the group page.
So choose wisely. Choose wisely.
Well, I don't know if we're allowed to choose wisely. I think we have the illusion of choice right now, like just as Terry described. I think a lot of people are going to want that vaccine as soon as it comes out, and who are not in the anti-vax crowd, and they have good reason because they're airplane pilots or they're whatever. They're going to be around a lot of people and they want the vaccine so they feel safe, right? And there's no guarantee that the one that our administration, or specifically this administration, chooses for us is the best for us. It's very clear that the NHS has chosen the Oxford vaccine. NHS has chosen AstraZeneca for their population. Does that mean that Trump has chosen the Moderna vaccine for us?
Trump chose whatever he can get out by election day.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, it's politics, I know. Put me on the cross, but he needs something before November 3rd. And it's the reality of it. And he'll push it out in October if he thinks it gives him any chance.
Look, the first, yeah, go ahead. We got to close out. Okay.
So the question is, why didn't anyone show up? Will we have a vaccine by November 3rd? Will Terry ever remember not to bring politics into the closing part of our show?
Never.
That's what we want to know. Will Dr. JJ Kasimis come back and see us next week when he's our special guest?
Yes.
I think he will. Whatever we need to know, whatever new news comes up, we'll tell you about it next week on the COVID Cast. Everyone have a great night. If you are here, stick around for the post show.